The first rays of January sunlight crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marus Thompson's penthouse office, casting long shadows across his immaculate desk. He stood adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass, admiring how the gold-rimmed glasses framed his sharp features and the distinguished gray at his temples added to his aura of success. The family heirloom watch on his wrist caught the light, and for a brief moment, its gleam reminded him of his father's disappointed eyes the day he had left the village, taking the watch that should have remained in Papa Thompson's possession. At home, Sarah Thompson knelt in her morning prayers, her white beaded braids falling forward as she bowed her head. Her silver three-circled pendant swung gently as she rocked back and forth, her prayer journal open before her. Through the window, the harsh harmattan winds carried dust across the city, and as she looked up, the golden flecks in her brown eyes seemed to dance with an otherworldly knowledge. Something in her spirit warned of turbulent times ahead, a message she knew her husband would dismiss with his usual sophisticated laugh. In the village, Papa Thompson sat beneath the ancient baobab tree, his eagle-top staff planted firmly beside him. His white beard caught the early morning light as he traced the tribal scarification on his forehead, a gesture he made whenever troubled thoughts plagued him. The ancient ring on his right index finger felt unusually heavy today, and his right leg, with its old limp, ached more than usual. In the distance, he could see his brother Peter's imposing figure, the red coral beads around his neck glinting ominously as he disappeared into the sacred grove. Mama Regina appeared as if from nowhere, her blue and white robes swirling in the dusty wind, her bare feet leaving no prints in the dry earth. Her pale grey eyes fixed on Papa Thompson as she approached, her brass walking stick with its snake motif tapping a rhythm that seemed to speak its own language. The henna patterns on her long fingers appeared to shift and change as she raised her hand in greeting, the multiple string bracelets on her wrist creating a soft, musical sound. Far from the village, in the shadows of his office, Marus reached for his phone to make the call he had been avoiding for years. His father's words from their last meeting echoed in his mind, "That watch will remind you of who you are and where you come from." As his fingers hovered over the numbers, he caught a glimpse of his reflection again, but this time he saw something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, his father's disappointed face stared back at him, and behind it, Uncle Peter's scarred face sneered, the missing little finger on his right hand seeming to point accusingly at Marus through the glass. Marus's hand trembled as he dialed the village number, each ring echoing through the vast emptiness of his office. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed to match the steady ticking of the gold watch on his wrist. Through the window, the setting sun painted Lagos in shades of amber and crimson, a stark contrast to the modern steel and glass that had become his sanctuary. As he waited, his perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the mahogany desk, creating a rhythm that felt like a countdown to something inevitable. In the village, Papa Thompson's ancient ring glowed dully in the fading light as he reached for the old rotary phone mounted on his mud house wall. His calloused fingers, marked by years of walking the land, wrapped around the receiver as his right leg ached with familiar discomfort. The eagle carved on his staff seemed to watch intently as he answered with a voice that carried both authority and "Where, hello, Thompson compound." Sarah sat in their modern kitchen, her flowing earth-tone dress pulling around her feet as she prepared dinner, when suddenly the golden flecks in her eyes flickered like warning signals. Her silver pendant grew cold against her skin, and the white beads in her braids clicked together without any wind to move them. She closed her prayer journal and held it close, knowing that somewhere between the city and village, a bridge was being built, or perhaps burned. Uncle Peter lurked in the shadows of his compound, his red coral beads pulsing with an unnatural glow as he sensed the connection being made between father and son. His dreadlocks, tied back with the red cord, swayed in a non-existent breeze as he watched Mama Regina emerge from the evening mist, her pale grey eyes fixed on the Thompson compound. The burn scar on his left cheek seemed to darken as his sneer deepened. The conversation between Marcus and his father lasted exactly 3 minutes, but its impact rippled through both words like stones thrown into still water. "I am coming home," Marcus had said, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting the last rays of sunlight. For the harvest ceremony, Papa Thompson had replied, his tribal scarification seeming to deepen in the gathering darkness. Neither man spoke of the watch, but its presence hung between them like an unspoken accusation, its ticking growing louder in Marcus's ears until it drowned out even the sound of his father's goodbye. That night, Sarah's dreams were filled with troubling visions. Her white beaded braids spread across the pillow like rivers of warning as she tossed and turned, her silver pendant pulsing with an otherworldly light. In her dream, she saw Mama Regina standing at a crossroads, her pale grey eyes glowing like beacons in the darkness, her brass Necadon staff pointing toward a path shrouded in harmattan mist. The henna patterns on the old woman's fingers seemed to crawl and shift, spelling out messages Sarah could not quite read. Uncle Peter stood in his secret grove under the full moon, his red coral beads drinking in the moonlight like drops of blood. His dreadlocks cast serpentine shadows on the ground as he moved with deliberate steps, the missing finger on his right hand a stark reminder of price of his dark pursuits. Around him, the ancient trees whispered secrets, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers toward the offerings he had laid out, offerings that would ensure Marcus's return would not be a peaceful one. In their penthouse bedroom, Marcus removed his gold-rimmed glasses and placed them beside the watch on his nightstand. The city lights sparkled beyond the window like 4 stars, but for the first time in years, they offered no comfort. His sharp jawline tightened as he recalled his father's voice, how it had carried both welcome and warning. The grey at his temple seemed to spread in his reflection, making him look more like his father than he cared to admit. Papa Thompson sat alone in his compound, his eagle-top staff propped against his chair, the ancient ring on his finger growing warm with unspoken prophecies. His white beard caught the moonlight as he traced the tribal scarification on his forehead, reading the messages written there by his ancestors. His right leg throbbed with the phantom pain that always preceded great change, and in the distance, he could hear the drums beginning to beat, drums that had not sounded since Marcus left the village. As dawn approached, Mama Regina appeared at Papa Thompson's door, her blue and white robes untouched by the red dust that covered everything else. Her bare feet left symbols in the earth that faded as quickly as they appeared, and the string bracelets on her wrist chimed a melody of imminent danger. "The sun returns," she said, her voice carrying the weight of both blessing and curse, but the price of his return has yet to be paid. The snake on her staff seemed to come alive in the pre-dawn light, its brass eyes fixed on the horizon where city met village, where old met new, where father waited for son. Marcus stood in his walk-in closet, surrounded by designer suits but reaching for something he had not worn in years, a traditional robe his father had sent him, still wrapped in its original package. His gold-rimmed glasses caught the morning light as he held the fabric, noting how its earth tones clashed with his modern sensibilities. The watch on his wrist seemed to tick louder, as if counting down to something inevitable, while his reflection in the full-length mirror showed a man caught between 2 worlds. Sarah packed their bags with methodical care, her white beaded braids swaying as she moved. Her prayer journal went in first, followed by essential items she had been spiritually prompted to include, herbs, candles, and sacred oils that her silver pendant had grown warm against whenever she touched them. The golden flecks in her eyes danced with unusual intensity as she walked, each item placed with purpose and prayer, though she knew Marcus would scoff at her preparations. At the village entrance, Papa Thompson leaned on his eagle-top staff, his right leg aching more than usual as he surveyed the gathering of elders. The tribal scarification on his forehead seemed to deepen as he listened to their concerns about the impending return of his son. His ancient ring caught the morning sun, sending patterns of light across the gathering that looked remarkably like the warning symbols Mama Regina had drawn in the dust days before. Uncle Peter stood in the shadows of his compound, the left side of his face darkened by both the burn scar and his deepening scowl. His red coral beads pulsed with malevolent energy as he watched the preparations for Marcus's return, his red-corded dreadlocks falling forward as he bent to draw symbols in the earth with his maimed hand. The missing finger on his right hand seemed to ache with anticipation of the chaos he had set in motion. As Marcus and Sarah's sleek city car pulled away from their penthouse, Mama Regina appeared at the village crossroads, her pale grey eyes fixed on the dusty horizon. Her blue and white robes remained untouched by the harsh harmattan winds, and her brass snake staff cast no shadow despite the bright morning sun. The string bracelets on her wrist chimed a discordant melody as she whispered into the wind, "The paths of father and son will cross in blood or blessing, the choice lies in the watching of the watch." The harmattan haze thickened as Marcus's car cut through the morning air, transforming the familiar highway into an otherworldly passage. His golden glasses caught red dust despite the sealed windows, and the family watch on his wrist had begun to tick with an irregular rhythm that matched his growing unease. Through the windshield, the road ahead appeared to shimmer like a mirage, occasionally taking on the unsettling hue of Uncle Peter's coral beads. Sarah sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her white beaded braids reflecting the strange light as her silver pendant grew increasingly cold against her skin. The golden flecks in her eyes darted rapidly, reading signs in the dust that swirled around their vehicle in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Her prayer journal, clutched tightly in her hands, seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat as they passed the ancient marker stone that separated city from ancestral lands. In the village, Papa Thompson's eagle-top staff suddenly slipped from his grasp, clattering against the packed earth with a sound that echoed like a warning bell. His ancient ring burned cold on his finger as he bent to retrieve it, his right leg nearly buckling beneath him. The tribal scarification on his forehead had begun to itch intensely, a sensation he had not felt since the day Marcus first left the village with the watch that was never meant to leave these lands. Uncle Peter stood at the crossroads where the old dirt track met the new highway, his red-corded dreadlocks whipping in a wind that touched nothing else. The burn scar on his left cheek had taken on a darker shade as he walked, his maimed right hand completing the final marks of a ritual that would ensure the journey ended before it could begin. His red coral beads pulsed with each word of his chant, their glow intensifying as Marcus's car drew nearer to the boundaries of their ancestral land. As the first drops of blood-red rain began to fall from a cloudless sky, Mama Regina materialized beside Papa Thompson, her blue and white robes repelling the crimson drops that stained everything else. Her pale grey eyes fixed on a point in the distance as her brass snake staff struck the ground 3 times, each strike sending ripples through the earth toward the approaching vehicle. The string bracelets on her wrist chimed a desperate warning as her voice cut through the thickening air. The price of pride comes due today, only truth can turn the tide of what is to come. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his normally steady hands trembling as the red rain intensified. His golden glasses could no longer keep the crimson drops from obscuring his vision, and the watch on his wrist had grown unnaturally hot against his skin. The pristine white cuffs of his designer shirt were now speckled with blood-like stains that spread like accusing fingers toward his palms. The car began to sputter and shake, fighting against an unseen force that seemed to pull it toward the shadows at the road's edge. Sarah closed her eyes in deep concentration, her white beaded braids clicking together in a rhythm that countered the chaotic drumming of the red rain. Her tricicled pendant blazed with silver light, creating a protective dome around their vehicle as her prayer journal fluttered open of its own accord, pages turning wildly until they settled on an ancient prayer she had written but never understood, until now. The golden flecks in her eyes brightened as she began to whisper words that made the very air around them shiver. At the village boundary, Papa Thompson raised his eagle-top staff toward the blood-red sky, his tribal scarification glowing with ancestral power as he fought against his brother's dark magic. The ancient ring on his finger pulsed in harmony with the earth's heartbeat, sending waves of protective energy along the road. His right leg, though paining him greatly, remained planted firmly as he stood like a sentinel against the gathering darkness, his white beard moving in a wind that carried the whispers of generations past. Uncle Peter's figure distorted in the crimson downpour, his red coral beads creating a web of malevolent light that stretched across the roadway. The burn scar on his face seemed to spread like living shadows, and where his missing finger should have been, a darkness deeper than night gathered and writhed. His red-corded dreadlocks rose like serpents around his head as he channeled forces that should have remained dormant, his sneer widening as he felt Marcus's vehicle approaching his carefully laid trap. Through the whirling chaos of red rain and dark magic, Mama Regina's brass snake staff suddenly struck the earth with a sound like thunder. Her pale grey eyes blazed with ancient knowledge as her blue and white robes created a circle of clarity in the storm. The string bracelets on her wrist rang out a clear note that cut through Uncle Peter's chanting, and her bare feet began to trace symbols of power in the blood-soaked dust. The watch must choose its true bearer, her voice rang out, before the sun set on this day of reckoning. Marcus felt the family watch burning against his skin with increasing intensity, its golden surface beginning to glow through his sleeve. His gold-rimmed glasses fogged with an unnatural mist as the watch's ticking grew so loud it drowned out even the hammering of the blood rain against the car's roof. With a cry of pain, he yanked the watch from his wrist, and it hung suspended in the air between him and Sarah, its hand spinning wildly backward as if trying to undo 15 years of time. Sarah's protective silver pendant pulsed in response to the watch's awakening, her white beaded braids rising like a crown around her head as ancient power filled the vehicle. The golden flecks in her eyes transformed into brilliant stars as she reached for her prayer journal, which had begun to emit a soft, pulsing light that matched the rhythm of the hovering watch. Through the crimson-streaked windshield, she could see two paths diverging ahead, one shrouded in Uncle Peter's malevolent darkness, the other illuminated by a light that seemed to emanate from Papa Thompson's compound. In the heart of the village, Papa Thompson stood unwavering, his eagle-top staff planted firmly in the earth as waves of dark energy crashed against his defenses. His tribal scarification blazed with ancestral light, and the ancient ring on his finger resonated with the watch's distant call. Despite his right leg threatening to buckle beneath him, he maintained his stance, his white beard glowing with a power that pushed back against his brother's encroaching shadows. Uncle Peter's fury manifested as a tornado of red-tinged darkness, his coral beads shattering one by one as he poured more power into his curse. The burn scar on his face had spread to cover half his body, and where his missing finger should have been, a void opened that threatened to swallow the very light around it. His red-corded dreadlocks writhed like live wires as he directed all his malevolent energy toward the suspended watch, determined to corrupt the ancient artifact before it could choose its rightful bearer. Through the chaos, Mama Regina's voice rang out clear and true, her blue and white robes creating a tunnel of calm through the storm toward Marcus's car. Her pale grey eyes fixed upon the floating watch as her brass snake staff drew a circle of protection around the vehicle. The string bracelets on her wrist chimed in harmony with the watch's ticking, and her bare feet left glowing footprints in the blood-soaked earth as she approached. "The time of choosing is upon us," she proclaimed, her words cutting through the tempest. "Let the watch find its true home." The watch suddenly exploded with golden light so intense it pierced through the blood rain like a beacon. Marcus shielded his eyes, his gold-rimmed glasses shattering from the supernatural force, while the light seemed to strip away his carefully constructed city persona, leaving him feeling naked and vulnerable before his own heritage. The expensive suit he wore began to dissolve, revealing the traditional robes beneath that he had packed but never intended to wear. Sarah's prayer journal burst open with a sound like thunder, its pages swirling with ancient text that rose into the air and danced around the glowing watch. Her white beaded braids moved like living things, each bead releasing pulses of protective energy, while her three-circled pendant created a shield of silver light around them. The golden flecks in her eyes transformed into miniature suns as she reached toward the watch, not to grasp it, but to guide its power. Papa Thompson raised his eagle-top staff high, its carved head releasing a cry that shook the earth. His tribal scarification pulsed with each beat of his heart, creating a rhythm that called to the watch across the distance, while the ancient ring on his finger sparked with recognition. His right leg, though trembling with effort, held firm as he channeled the strength of his ancestors into one final stand against his brother's darkness. Uncle Peter's form began to warp and twist as his powers turned against him. The void where his missing finger should have been started to consume his hand, creeping up his arm like living darkness. His red-corded dreadlocks burst into crimson flame, and the burn scar on his face cracked open to reveal the true corruption within. With a howl of rage and desperation, he launched himself toward the floating watch, his remaining coral beads shattering into dust. Mama Regina appeared between the brothers, her blue and white robes untouched by the chaos swirling around them. Her brass snake staff struck the ground with finality, sending cracks of golden light racing through the earth toward the suspended watch. The string bracelets on her wrist rang out in a deafening chorus as her pale grey eyes blazed with the knowledge of ages. "The gate opens," she declared, as reality itself seemed to tear open before them, revealing a path that led not just through space, but through time itself. The watch, now hovering in the center of Mama Regina's newly opened gate, began to pose with images of the past. Marcus watched, transfixed, as scenes from 15 years ago played across its golden surface, the day he took the watch, his father's pain expression, and the true purpose of the heirloom he had stolen. His face, now bare without his gold-rimmed glasses, reflected the raw emotions of each memory as they washed over him like waves of judgment. Sarah's protective dome expanded, her white beaded braids now glowing with their own inner light as the silver pendant at her throat resonated with ancient power. Through the golden flecks in her eyes, she could see the threads of time unraveling and reweaving themselves around them. Her prayer journal levitated before her, its pages revealing the prophecy she had unknowingly written years ago: when the watch returns, time itself will bend to heal the broken circle. Papa Thompson's eagle-topped staff connected with the earth, creating a bridge between past and present. His tribal scarification shimmered with ancestral wisdom as the ancient ring on his finger called out to its twin, a ring Marcus had never known existed, hidden within the mechanism of the watch itself. Despite his right leg's weakness, he stepped forward with newfound strength, drawing closer to the gate that separated him from his son. Uncle Peter's desperate lunge toward the watch was halted mid-stride, his body freezing in the space between moments. The darkness consuming his arm from his missing finger had reached his shoulder, and his red-corded dreadlocks hung suspended like threads of fate about to be cut. The burn scar on his face had become a window into a void that threatened to swallow him whole, revealing the price of his dark bargains. Mama Regina stood at the center of it all, her blue and white robes rippling with temporal energy as her brass snake staff drew patterns in reality itself. The string bracelets on her wrist played a melody that existed in no mortal time, and her pale grey eyes reflected scenes from past, present, and possible futures. "Choose," her voice echoed through dimensions, "for the gate stands open only while time holds its breath, and the watch awaits its true guardian's heart." The watch's golden surface cracked like an egg, releasing a blinding light that united past and present in a single moment of truth. Marcus found himself suspended between what was and what could be, his borrowed years of pride falling away like autumn leaves. The traditional robes he wore beneath his dissolving suit began to glow with the same light as his father's tribal marks, revealing patterns that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. Sarah's prayer journal and white beaded braids moved in perfect synchronization, creating a bridge of light between father and son. Her tricircled pendant released a final pulse of protective energy as the golden flecks in her eyes revealed the one true path forward. Through her blessed sight, she watched as 15 years of misunderstanding and pride began to unravel like threads from a fraying cloth, leaving only the pure, unbreakable bonds of family behind. Papa Thompson stepped through the gate with the certainty of one who had waited for this moment through countless seasons. His eagle-top staff struck sparks of ancestral fire from the earth as his ancient ring called out to its twin within the broken watch. His tribal scarification blazed with forgiveness as his right leg, no longer weak, carried him forward to meet his son in the space between times. Uncle Peter's form began to fade like smoke in a strong wind, the darkness he had cultivated consuming him from the inside out. His red coral beads crumbled to dust, and his red-corded dreadlocks withered away as the price of his malevolence came due. The burn scar that had marked him as cast spread until nothing remained but a shadow that the blood rain quickly washed away, taking with it all memory of his bitterness. Mama Regina raised her brass snake staff one final time, her blue and white robes shimmering as reality rewove itself around them. The string bracelets on her wrist played the last notes of an ancient song as her pale grey eyes reflected the completion of a cycle centuries in the making. "What was broken is mended," she proclaimed, as the watch reformed itself around fathers and sons joined hands, its heartbeat now matching their own, and what was lost has found its way home. In the soft light of the first true morning after the storm, the Thompson compound glowed with renewed life. Marcus stood beside his father at the ancestral shrine, the watch now resting comfortably between them, shared as it was always meant to be. His gold-rimmed glasses were gone, but his vision had never been clearer, the tribal marks that had emerged during his transformation now matching his father's with perfect symmetry. The traditional robes he wore felt more natural than any designer suit ever had. Sarah knelt in the family prayer room, her white beaded braids catching the morning sun as she wrote in her journal with peaceful certainty. Her silver pendant rested quietly against her chest, its 3 circles now aligned with ancient symbols carved into the walls generations ago. The golden flecks in her eyes danced softly as she documented their story, understanding now that her years of prayer had been preparing her for this very moment, when broken family bonds would be restored. Papa Thompson's eagle-top staff stood proudly beside the ancestral throne, its carved head catching the light just as the ancient ring on his finger reflected the sun's rays toward the spot where Uncle Peter's darkness had been cleansed. His right leg, now fully healed, carried him with the strength of his forebears as he walked the compound grounds, his white beard and tribal scarification marking him as both guardian and guide for the generations to come. Where Uncle Peter's compound had stood, a garden now bloomed impossibly in the dry season, with flowers that had not been seen in the village for generations. The darkness had been transformed into light, the bitterness into beauty. No trace remained of the red coral beads or burning scars that had marked his descent into darkness, and in their place, healing herbs grew wild and strong. Mama Regina was last seen at dawn, her blue and white robes fading into the morning mist as her brass snake staff drew one final blessing in the earth. The string bracelets on her wrist chimed a melody of completion as her pale grey eyes reflected a future now set right. "The watch keeps perfect time again," she whispered as she disappeared, leaving behind footprints that filled with morning dew, each one containing a perfect reflection of the rising sun. Marcus's young son stood transfixed before the ancestral shrine, his small hands reaching for the golden watch that now rested on a special pedestal between 2 generations of tribal marks. Like his father before him, the child bore the same distinctive facial features that marked him as a true Thompson, but unlike the past, he wore these marks with pride rather than shame. The watch ticked in perfect harmony with the boy's heartbeat, acknowledging the next keeper of its legacy. Sarah sat with her daughter, whose white beaded braids matched her own, teaching her the ancient prayers that had saved their family. Her silver pendant had birthed a smaller version that now graced her child's neck, and the golden flecks that had once been unique to Sarah's eyes now shone in her daughter's gaze. The prayer journal, its pages filled with both history and prophecy, lay open between them, ready to receive a new generation's wisdom. Papa Thompson, his eagle-top staff now carved with additional symbols representing their family's triumph over darkness, watched his grandchildren with quiet joy. His tribal scarification seemed to glow with ancestral approval as his ancient ring caught the light, casting protective shadows over the compound. His right leg, strong and sure, carried him through daily walks with the little ones, teaching them the stories written in every tree and stone of their land. The garden that had replaced Uncle Peter's compound had become a place of healing and learning. Children from all over the village gathered there to learn about their heritage from the elders, their laughter rising like music where darkness once dwelt. The flowers bloomed year-round now, each petal containing a fragment of the ancient wisdom that had almost been lost to pride and bitterness. In the heart of the village, stories were still told of Mama Regina's final blessing, whispered by those who claimed to see her on moonlit nights, her blue and white robes gliding between words. Her brass snake staff had been carved into the new village gate, and some said the string bracelets she wore could still be heard chiming on nights when important choices were to be made. But her pale grey eyes lived on in the village children who learned to see beyond the visible world, carrying her legacy of wisdom into the future. The watch, they said, still kept the perfect time between words, its ticking a reminder that some bridges, once rebuilt, could never truly be broken again.